Hello. It's a beautiful day to talk about books. I'm so glad you could find your way onto my channel okay, and that you made it all the way here to talk about what we read this month. This one's definitely going to be a long one. I'm even thinking of splitting it in half just because I'm in the mood to talk a lot, and in May, that's what we're talking about today. All the books I read in May. I read a lot. I read 14 books, and so I'm just so excited to talk about them all. I've decided to split this video up into sections so you can skip around by genre. I think we have classics. I know we have romance, we have some manga, we have nonfiction, sci-fi. Get cozy in bed, grab a coffee, grab some tea, steal someone's cat. So I think we're gonna start it off with classics because I think we have to. I think we all know what we've all been waiting for, but we also had the Dark Academics Readathon in here this month, hence why I got to read so much. But I think we're just going to kick it off with classic literature that I got to read in May. And besides that, May has just been one of the best, I think the best reading month for me. I had so many 5 stars in here, which is insane. I found some new favorites. This one I finished last night at 10:30 p.m. I just can't believe. War and Peace. Thank you. I'm gonna try to talk the least about the book I think I want to talk the most about, just because Carolyn and I will have our live show debate on Saturday the 5th, I believe, of June. So if you're interested in that, I think she threatened me that it would probably be 5 hours long. So if you'd like to come see us talk about this book, that will be on Saturday the 5th at 2 p.m. EST. Carolyn and I, and so many of you, it's just been incredible going on this War and Peace journey with you all. It's just been amazing seeing everyone read this together over the span of 2 months. We've been reading this since April, and it just feels like a huge portion of my life. Reading War and Peace is a life achievement. I want to say a life goal, so congratulations, but it's just such a big... And it was such a big part. It was a constant companion. I got to read this every day for 2 months, and it feels so surreal that it's over. It doesn't feel like it's over. But I'm gonna try not to talk about my feelings toward this book and just give you a little bit of information and do a little bit of a review so you know if maybe you want to take this kind of Mount Everest journey in your own life. But War and Peace, what is it? It's not a novel. It is Leo Tolstoy kind of trying to rewrite the way that history writes itself and rewrite the events of the Napoleonic Wars through the eyes of real people, and so many different things that touch on reality and aren't tinged by, well, of course they're tinged by his own history's bias and his own historian's viewpoint bias, but for him history is not what it has been defined as up until the wars of 1812, and especially how the Napoleonic Wars have been written on and written as by historians. To him, it's completely wrong. This book is all about cause and effect, but more than that, breaking that down and saying that no, there cannot be one cause only for one effect. It's much more complicated than that, and so you get these stories and these narratives of these real people like Pierre and Andre and Natasha, who are these Russian people who are going through their lives and through war and finding how difficult it is to live in peace with yourself, and finding out how hard it is to struggle with yourself to have a peaceful life regardless of the Napoleonic Wars that are going on. And then it's people like Nikolai and Andre and Pierre even who have these epiphanies in the real war, in this conflict between Russia and France and Napoleon and Europe, and strangely finding peace through death and violence and suffering, and having these epiphanies that are only brought on by this extreme lack of peace about peace. This book touches on so much psychology of an individual, on what power means, on even if there is such a thing as power. This book is also so much about free will and how much free will a person really has, especially through the eyes of history. It's a really interesting study, and I think if I ever read War and Peace ever again, I think I will start with the last epilogue. There are 2 epilogues to War and Peace, and I think I would start with the last epilogue and then go through the whole book with that in mind. It's been so rare for me to find such like a natural connection between the philosophy of an author and what they're trying to show, and the progression of characters' lives and actions, to show that philosophy while also feeling so real, so natural. And maybe that just means that Tolstoy's philosophy is life's philosophy. I'm not sure. And on the back it says if life could write, it would write like Tolstoy. So I just think there's so much in this book. On top of that, you have gorgeous writing. As you can see, I obviously fell just in love with this book. I gave it 5 stars, if that's not clear. But it's a life-changing book. It is such a soul-wrenching book. Its depictions of everything is so real and so present, and it just like comes out of the page, strangles you, pulls you into this book, and essentially just like changes, I think, a little bit of who you are, and especially how you see history and how you see people, and especially how you see what your own history of the life you are living at the moment is going to look like, and whether or not you can affect any kind of change in your life. And I think the last thing I want to say, which was probably one of my favorite aspects to just kind of study while I was reading this book, was Tolstoy's recognition that so many people are not their own people. Their autonomy is not what they think it is, and so much of what they presume to be their free will and their free actions are actually under the sway of so many causes and persuasions that they won't ever be able to know, but also how there's a lot of beauty in that, because everyone who exists contemporaneously, as Tolstoy says, there is a connection between them and they all influence one another. And so to see like that pre-deterministic outlook, while also paired with the lives of Andrei, Pierre, and Natasha, you see that maybe it's not as bleak of a diagnosis as a lot of what Tolstoy's essays in War and Peace would have you believe, and how there's so much beauty in influencing and caring for other people's lives and getting attached to them, and how intertwined and connected and however much of like a puppetry your life may seem to be, you can affect like almost who is pulling the strings by who you choose to surround yourself with as well, because everyone's kind of strings just get so tangled. And while things may seem to be a lot of either happy or tragic mistakes, Tolstoy kind of lets you know that those mistakes couldn't have been anything other than what they were, and so they're not mistakes. And it's just incredible. It's so good. If you haven't read War and Peace, I highly suggest that you do. It takes a lot of, I think, patience, because there were definitely a few parts in here where it got a little bit dry. In the end, though, it was well worth it for me, and so I would highly recommend War and Peace. I can't believe we're done. Alright, the next classic I read was The Alienist and Other Stories of 19th Century Brazil by Machado de Assis. This was incredible. This was my first Machado book. This is a collection of short stories, but it was so good. For me, I think this was a really great starting point. There's maybe about like 7 or 8 short stories in here. My favorite was definitely The Alienist, but something that is so present through every story is his brilliant perception of people around him, and especially like he's just so playful with his words, and he's like kind of politely undermining polite society and making them laugh at themselves a lot, like I think Charles Dickens does. But in here there's so much irony. The first story is called the second story is called The Education of a Poser, which is all about a father like educating his son on how to be a poser. So it's very like satirical, and it's just so good. And also like I laughed out loud. He's so funny. And his way of describing things, it's so cool. Like, it's a very unique, distinctive voice, and I just loved it so much. My favorite story was, like I said, The Alienist, which is about this man whose recent obsession is science. This is a story all about kind of what happens when our kind of hailing of scientific enlightenment and scientific progress goes the other way, and science, or at least what calls itself science, becomes a vehicle for humans to completely just go the other way and degrade and erode everything and all the progress that we've worked towards. Because this man who becomes the alienist, he starts to study crime and criminals and what he deems the insane people of the town where he lives. And so he builds an asylum in the town town, and eventually what goes on in this town, how many people get committed to this asylum. It's just crazy. And he's also trying to develop, it literally is crazy. He's trying to develop theories of madness, because he's trying to develop these theories and find out like what madness is and provide concrete kind of examples and theories about it. Is insane. There's lots of revolutions that end up happening in this town, and it's just so good. There's no other word. It's just so good. This is the edition translated by John Charles Chastain. I'm honestly not sure if this was the best translation ever, but even through this translator's words, I was so swept away, so impressed by Machado's writing. I thought it was incredible. I cannot wait to read a proper, like, full novel by him, because his short stories just really, they're so impactful, and they know exactly what they're doing. They're so sure of themselves. They have like at least one goal or many goals in mind, and for me, I think all of them just like completely hit the mark and like really did carry out those goals. And besides that, the writing was gorgeous, extremely funny, and just honestly a wonder to read. I adored this, and I would once again highly recommend. I think I gave this either a 4 or 4.5, just because short story collections aren't usually my jam, but this one was as close to marmalade as we've ever gotten. So good. Very, very good. So we got to read some more Russian literature this month, because I picked up First Love by Ivan Turgenev, and this was incredible. So First Love is an extremely short novel. Maybe it's like technically a short story or novella. Doesn't matter, because it packed just everything in its suitcase that you need for a good 5-star read, and I did end up giving this 5 stars. So First Love is about the 16-year-old boy named Voldemar, and he lives, or at the time when this novel begins, he's living in a country house with his mother and father, who are having some marital issues. They're not getting along. His family atmosphere is a little bit tumultuous, but then he finds out that his neighbor has a daughter named Princess Zenaida, and she is, I think, 21 years old, and he just is so infatuation to the utmost extreme. This novel actually begins outside of the story, because the novel begins many years later, and we have a group of men who are all sitting around, maybe after dinner or something, and they are discussing love. And then the topic of first love is brought up, and one of the men says, "Hey, I have a story that probably tops all of your stories. Do you want to hear it?" And they're like, "Yeah, bro, let me get a drink, sit down, and tell me your story." And then the actual story begins. Already to it, like, this book has so many layers, and I wasn't really expecting anything. I was like, yeah, it's probably going to be some cool writing, it's going to be very lyrical, beautiful, and it's just going to be a nice little flouncy flounce through the fields of first love and infatuation. No, this book had like, it was like the world's biggest onion. I just kept peeling and finding more things. There's so many layers. This book was like an ogre, because ogres are like onions. This book just absolutely floored me. Like, I was never sure where it was going. At times it seemed to be like a piece of poetry. It seemed to be like a staged play or farce. It seemed to be an extremely romantic, idealistic little painting or vignette of Voldemar and his feelings for Zenaida. At times it was an extremely dark, stormy ocean of like jealousy, and Voldemar was constantly being tossed on these waves because Zenaida entertains many guests, most of them men, and so they would have like these soirees where they would go and play games, and they would play like truth or dare or cards, and then everyone would have to maybe like come up with a poem dedicated to her or something like that, or act out a story. And also Zenaida herself was such a fascinating character. I loved her. Since most of First Love was from the perspective of Voldemar, I was really feeling like we wouldn't really get an in-depth look into any of like the other characters, like Zenaida, the other suitors. There's like a whole host of these men who have different backgrounds and varying tempers and jealousies and feelings and kindnesses, and Voldemar as kind of the newest addition to Zenaida's little group of admirers, and the way that he's treated by all of the mostly older men around him was also very well done. But you do get such an insane look into everyone in this book. Not just Voldemar, but his parents, Zenaida's parents, all of the men that appear at the soiree. Like I said, this book had so many layers to it, because as you're like going down and reading this book, it starts to take on this like semi-troublesome, a little bit scary tone, because the way that first love is being experienced in here, you start to realize that it's not only Voldemar, the man telling the story and recounting his infatuation with Zenaida as his experience of first love as the only instance of that love that's occurring. It's actually about multiple people's first love. I'm not going to say too much else than that, but I was just incredibly blown away by the very taut, suspenseful, kind of maddening atmosphere that Turgenev created with these kind of on the outside innocent looking and very like nice first love feelings, but it's just so much darker, so much more tormenting than that, and especially what ends up happening in the short story and then the ultimate kind of end to it, and the commentary on how fleeting feelings can be and how bottomless they can end up really being, especially after, you know, you grow up and you're not 16 anymore and you're older, or you're looking back on these feelings and what they might have meant to you at the moment back then versus what they've become now. But just like in the moment reading that book, it was just so, it was like this like coil that was just so taut, and it was incredible. 5 stars. 5 stars. Highly recommend. And finally, the last classic that I read in May was also 5 stars. We just had a friggin' spectacular reading month, but that is The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. This was so good. Just incredible. This was my second Gibran. Oh, also, side note, I think starting with First Love by Turgenev, if that's your first work by him, I thought it was a great place to start for me because that was my first Turgenev, so good. But on the note of The Prophet, this was my second Gibran because I read The Broken Wings last year, one of my favorite books of all time now, and this one was just also so impressive. So while The Broken Wings is a tragic love story, and it's very much a novel, albeit a short one, we're spinning out of control, The Prophet is more poetry, extremely lyrical, a lot of philosophy, and essentially a lot of advice, because there's no central plot or happening to this book. It opens with this man, the prophet, about to leave and set sail away from the land where he's been staying for a very long time, and all of the people who have grown very attached to this fixture of the prophet in their daily lives and homes and observing them come out, first of all beg him to stay, and then ask him for advice and ask them to tell them what he's been observing and give them advice on how to live their lives, essentially. And so each chapter then becomes advice on things like love, sorrow, grief, possession, marriage, living, work, food, drink, literally everything you could ever probably want advice on, and it's really good advice. It's gorgeous on top of that. Like, Gibran's writing is just, like, it is magic. Like, it's like a magic trick every single time. I'm like, how can you make your words do that? How does your language live like that? This one also comes with illustrations by Gibran that he did himself, so that was just really nice to see, and I think this is also an extremely remarkable starting place if you would like to get into the works of Gibran, because I think, honestly, I just wish I could recommend him to everyone because this was incredible. I don't have too much to say other than just being in constant, like, jaw-dropping awe of his writing because it was phenomenal. So that is the last classic we read this month, and man, was it a good one. So very glad to have ticked this off of my shelf. All right, next up, I think we're gonna move into the category that I'm going to call, well, I don't know, probably something like literary fiction slash historical literary fiction slash coming of age or something. The novel, how about, with a dose of kind of mostly literary in there. I don't know. So the very first book that I actually completed in May was In Watermelon Sugar by Richard Brautigan. Whoa. Wow. Okay, let me try and see. This is an extremely short book, and I do remember everything that happened, but I'm not sure how I want to exactly talk about this book. You probably heard, you know, the song Watermelon Sugar by Harry Styles. This is the book that gave him, I think, a lot of that inspiration for this song. In Watermelon Sugar is a utopian vision. We have this world it could possibly be post-apocalyptic. It probably is to an extent. There's also, once again, a lot going on in this very short book, because we have our protagonist, who is also the narrator. He is writing a book about watermelon sugar, which hasn't been done for a number of years. And so you're reading the book that he's writing about his life and about watermelon sugar. Watermelon sugar is this place where most things are made from watermelon sugar. This is an extremely difficult to conceptualize book, but also an extremely pretty book. Like, this book is just pretty and sparkling because this world has a lot of different things in it that are just really pretty. For example, this place has a lot of little rivers and streams, but our narrator lets us know that he calls things that are like 2 feet wide a river. And when people die, when you die in watermelon sugar, your body is put into a glass box, like a glass coffin, and then you're put at the bottom of the stream, and you look up and you are buried with foxfire or something, the flowers that like glow at nights. And these rivers are filled with trout, extremely curious, cute trout who come and like swim over you and look at you. And it's a little bit morbid, but also extremely glowing and pretty. There was so much about light in this book as well, which was really, really beautiful. But like I said, there's a lot going on in this place, because we are told that before a lot of these people existed here, this town and this place and this locale where these people are living used to be inhabited by tigers, talking tigers. The tigers talked, and so when these people moved in, the tigers were extremely violent sometimes. They killed our narrator's parents and ate them in front of him, and then right after they finished eating his parents, they helped him with his arithmetic homework. So kind of a weird one. Some drugs were definitely being done. Yeah, this was a book that like you could definitely delve a lot into, but it was also a book that was just like an experience that you're wading through, and I didn't really want to look that much deeper because it was just a world where like you look around and you're like, oh my gosh, what is that? And you're like, okay, I'm just gonna take it as it is and roll with it. For example, there's statues everywhere of vegetables around this place, Watermelon Sugar. For example, our narrator has like a 7-foot statue of a potato outside his house. Gotta get me one of those. We have Inboil, who's like the leader of this gang, and he goes to like the works, which is where probably like the post-apocalyptic world, potentially maybe our world or something like that. They store everything, all of the junk and garbage from the past, from like the ancients and stuff like that. And so we have like this competing kind of ideology about what we should do with the past. In Watermelon Sugar very quickly becomes extremely violent and very gory, because there's a lot of different problems going on. It's also a lot about the counterculture generation and stuff like that. This was honestly fascinating. Definitely a book I would love to read again, and I did listen to the audiobook, which was really well done, so I would recommend that. But honestly, just one of the weirdest, funkiest little books I read in a while, but also a really good one. So I gave it 4 stars, and I would recommend it as well. Next, I listened to My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. This was really good. I was not expecting to enjoy this as much as I did, because I don't really love like contemporary or historical novels where not like a lot happens and you just follow them growing up. I'm not the biggest fan of just like kind of the average Bildungsroman and stuff like that, but this one was incredible. This one is set in 1950s Naples, and we're following mostly 2 girls, but this is one of like the most intricately peopled books I've read in a while, because it comes with an extremely full cast of characters in the neighborhood that we're in. Like, we get to know absolutely everyone, their jobs, their family, and stuff like that. But like I said, we're principally following Lila and Lenu, and they are 2 friends, and their friendship is definitely very interesting to analyze, because it's not the healthiest. At times it's extremely competitive. They're both insanely gifted and very smart girls, and so they find themselves constantly competing with one another. Leela is definitely kind of the star. Everyone falls in love with her. She just has like this, like, just something about her that's so different, and also so like fierce, and she knows what she wants in life. She doesn't really let what anyone else thinks of her do very much to her, but Lenu, or Elena, is the one narrating this book. And it was just so strange, because she is the voice that we're getting. We're seeing through her eyes and her friendship with Leela, but it's almost like Leela is like the main focus of this novel, and so all of a sudden Lei Nu, our protagonist, kind of becomes us. It was like a really weird blending between like the reader and Lei Nu. This book was extremely immersive, like just crazy. It was like a movie. Like I can just see everything. I think Ferrante just has such a wonderful talent of like, first of all, reality. Of course, this is an extremely real place, but just like the terrors of childhood that she shows to you, the way that Lei Nu starts to blend in with you, the reader, and you feel like you're in her place, even though a lot of it I felt like I couldn't identify a lot with Lei Nu because she is kind of like this weird mirror, funhouse mirror image to Leela, but you, the reader, just suddenly like fill and take her place, and so this book becomes even more real to you. There's so much violence in this book. There's so many conflicting families and emotions and traditions, and of course what's happening in 1950s Naples and Italy and stuff like that was also just such a playground for this novel, as we're following these two girls growing up all the way from like when they're in grade, I don't know, kindergarten or something, up until they are of marriageable age. Like I said, I think the friendship between Leela and Lei Nu was the most compelling thing to follow, especially because it's so complex. They go through so many ups and downs, and it is such, I think, a hard atmosphere for these two girls growing up in to have a kind of healthy relationship with one another. And Ferrante just really shows how the outside stressors and the outside like implications of everything that's going on, how that merges and how that affects and acts as a little bit of toxin to their friendship and stuff like that. So this was just incredible. I gave it 4 stars. I finished it and I was like, no, I need the second one. I need it right now. Where is it? So I will definitely be continuing with the Neapolitan novels because this is book 1. So I would really, really recommend this again. My Brilliant Friend and the book I read next are also really good to talk about, I think, together, one after the other, because this one was also extremely real and so raw, and like it just was so immersive yet again, and like you just like went into the book. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not very often that I feel like I'm like in the book and I'm not just like reading the book, like observing and analyzing and like appreciating the writing, but it just feels like a story where less the language matters than like what's happening and what images and feelings you're getting from it. It's not a book that has gorgeous writing by any means. It's not a book that's lyrically beautiful or flowery. It's not a book where the writing is trying to bombard you with metaphors or astound you with its like academic accolades in its writing or anything like that. It's a book where it's trying to show you something that's happened and something that is still happening, and someone's life that is extremely important and shouldn't need and doesn't need any embellishment or beautiful writing to matter or to draw your attention. And that is Girl in Translation by Jean Kwok. I think this accomplished definitely the same feelings in me as when I read My Brilliant Friend, because once again, our narrator is this girl named Kimberly, and this Girl in Translation is semi-autobiographical of our author's life, Jean Kwok, because when she was probably around the same age, I think, she was born in Hong Kong, and as a child immigrated to Brooklyn, where she worked with her family in a sweatshop. So that is exactly what happens to Kimberly. It is just her and her mother, and they move to New York with kind of the promise from their aunt and uncle that they will be given a good place to live and they will find work. But what ends up happening is that they live in Brooklyn in a very unsafe, harmful apartment where nothing works, everything is broken down. It's not the American dream that Kimberly's mother had imagined at all. It's dismal, it's awful, and even worse than that, they end up essentially working in their aunt and uncle's sweatshop in Chinatown every single day, and that becomes their life for years and years and years. We follow Kimberly, who is narrating this, and when she moves, she's just about to start elementary school, and so you follow her through all the difficulties that she faces. She works in the sweatshop with her mother by night, and by day she goes to school. And a lot of this is about education, and Kimberly is an extremely gifted, smart, resilient, curious girl, but you see how a lot of like her mother's weight of the American dream and what she wanted and expected by moving to America is crushed, and Kimberly becomes essentially not only a translator for her mother but a lot of the adult in that relationship. And so like just seeing her grow up in America and with her mother and having to work in this factory and all of the relationships that she builds and stuff like that, like it was just so compelling. You just get to see like so much, like because it's from her point of view, you get to see both sides of what she presents and what face she shows to people that like she's going to school with during the day. She's an extremely gifted student, but then also she hides so much of her life from them, and then when she goes to the factory at night, she's also a completely different person. So she's just constantly switching back and forth between these two lives and these two people, essentially, and it was just incredible. All right, next, I think we're gonna move into probably a category I'll be able to talk a little bit quicker through, and that is gonna be manga, and then we'll move right into romance, because the manga that I did read this month were romance. So that was my goal for May. I wanted to read more romance and I wanted to read more manga, and we did it. We did do that. Some of them were great, some of them were awful, some of them were just okay. The first manga I read was An Incurable Case of Love, Volume 1 by Maki and Joji. This, the manga I read, I don't know, they're just absurdly funny to me. I don't know. This one, we are following a young nurse. She has just graduated with her nursing degree and she is placed at a hospital, but we quickly understand that the reason that she's asked to be placed at this hospital is because like 5 years prior, she was walking down the street, this woman collapses in front of her and starts having a heart attack, and so she's like, what the heck do I do? Obviously, you call 911 and help the person. But because she's scrambling and not sure what to do, it's very lucky that a doctor is also walking down the same road where this woman is conveniently having a heart attack. And then our protagonist, Sakura, falls in love with the doctor, who ends up being Dr. Tendo, just right there on the spot. Love at first coronary tragedy. Unfortunately, when she gets to the hospital, she realizes that Dr. Tendo, first of all, he says he doesn't remember her. He's like, is your head okay? I don't even know who you are. And she learns that his reputation among the hospital and the nurses is not a good one. He's a very harsh, severe, not very nice or polite, but she knows that like when he's with like the actual patients and stuff like that, everyone adores him. And so you follow her like training. She goes through all the different departments. She's thinking about what department she wants to be placed in, and of course always having this tumultuous relationship with the Dark Lord, as she's dubbed him. You just follow like her trying to be like a complete nuisance in his life, getting him to admit that maybe he does remember her from all those years ago, and essentially trying to like break down this persona that he's built up at work. It was fine. Like, it was just fun, quick, extremely easy, which was what I wanted, especially while I was reading War and Peace. I think for both of the manga I've read though, like the male leads in the book have just been like too nasty. Like, they cross way too many lines to the point where like it's just unfathomable to me why our female lead would keep pursuing or would keep feeling what they're feeling for them. I get it, and looking past that, it was fun, it was cute sometimes, it was quirky, and I think what I actually enjoyed way more than the romance in An Incurable Case of Love was the portrayal and like Sakura's dealing with becoming a nurse for the first time. Like, to me that was just way more incredibly realistic, because it shows like everything that she has to go through with certain patients while working in certain departments, looks like the physical toll and also the mental toll of her line of work. She goes through a lot in this book, and like I thought that was just like really well done, and I was actually very invested in her and her like battle with herself, like figuring out, is this actually what I want to do? Am I okay to do this? It's a huge mental strain. It created a few mental health problems for her as well, and I just thought that was like really well done actually, and what I was way more invested in, because I don't think I've ever read a book about a nurse or about nursing or about hospitals or anything like that. I did pick up the second one because I think I want to read a few more volumes before I decide if I want to continue on with this series or not, but that is the first one. The next one I read is even more funny and just so much more bizarre to me, and that is Midnight Secretary, Volume 1, once again, by Tomu Omi. This is about a vampire. So Our two leads in this one, we have Kaya Satozuka, and she is a secretary. She's like so good at her job. She is so competent, so intelligent. When the notorious director Toma once again goes through another secretary, they always inevitably end up quitting because once again he's kind of the same caliber of nastiness and obnoxiousness and meanie. He is a meanie. As Incurable Case of Love, Kaya gets assigned to him, but unfortunately she finds out that he is a vampire, hence Midnight Secretary, because she has to work very odd hours of the night, since he works primarily in the night. So he essentially blackmails her into keeping his secret that he is a vampire, and because she's such a good secretary, she ends up like scheduling in even his blood feeding times / dates. But of course they kind of both start to develop feelings for each other. This book definitely just had so many tropes. I believe this is an older manga, maybe like 2004 or something like that. No, 2007. But on the whole, like, this book just made me laugh, I think, so much more than it probably should have, and so that was really, really fun. And just so absurd, so bizarre, but also very funny to me. So I gave it 3 stars just because it was like, once again, what I wanted and what I needed, but I honestly don't know if I'm going to continue on with this series, but that is that one. Alright, now moving into kind of more romance proper, we had a really bad one and a really good one. So the first one was The Ruthless Gentleman by Louise Bay. Right. This wasn't great, but honestly, I was really looking forward to this one because it started off pretty strong, actually. So basically, I wanted to read this because it sounded cool, because we were sat on a yacht. It was like summer, we were cruising, we were on the open sea, and we were following our head stewardess, Avery, and she's working on a yacht, and then all of a sudden she gets booked for like this one guest-only yacht excursion that's like 8 weeks long. So the guest in question ends up being this guy named Hayden Wolf, and it's just him, and he books the trip, and as soon as he gets on board, he like takes everyone's communication devices. He's extremely private. He has booked this as like a work trip because at his company... Okay, problem 1. We've introduced problem 1. I actually have no conception whatsoever of what this man does. I listened to this whole audiobook from page 1 to the last page, and I don't know at all what his job is, what his company is, what he does. And every single chapter that Hayden was in, a lot of it was devoted to talking about his work, talking about how he's trying to find a leak that's occurring at his company because it's impacting his sales or his business transactions or his deals with another company. It was a lot of useless, circular, trite lingo about the business world, while at the same time we never freaking know, or at least I didn't, what business this man works at. What does he do? No one knows. He doesn't know. That was incredibly frustrating. I also hate when romance books have an extremely easily solvable conflict or reason why it's a little bit of like forbidden romance or why two people can't be together. In this case, of course, Avery is not supposed to really like, be friendly or interact or form relationships with her guests on the yacht. However, as soon as the yacht docks, when the little sea shanty is over, he's not going to be a guest. And you can be together. And so like just the whole struggle and like her feelings and his feelings on board and stuff like that, I was just like, this is ridiculous. You can literally wait a couple weeks. Okay, things I liked about this. I liked Avery. I think she had a pretty compelling backstory and stuff. There was definitely a lot of investment that Louise Bay tried to put into her character and her reasoning and stuff like that. I gave it 2 stars and like it just didn't accomplish anything. I felt like there wasn't that much connection. The writing wasn't great. The plotting wasn't great. These chapters were insanely long. I think this was a no for me. I think this one's a no for me, but we're gonna keep looking, and it's okay because the next romance I read was one of the best, one of the cutest. I loved it. It was stunning, and that is Heart of the Fae by Emma Hamm. This is a fantasy romance, And it's also a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, and we're also following so much nature and so much coziness. There was so much comfort. Like, I listened to this book so slowly because it was so gorgeous and so spectacular. And Sorka, who we're following, is a human girl, and her adoptive father and sisters are all suffering with what is known as the blood beetle plague, where little beetles go in your skin and stuff. And so Sorka is a very gifted healer, but no one in the town where she lives is listening to her because they all think she might be a witch or a changeling or something like that. Her mother was burned at the stake because the people at the town thought that she was a witch. And so when kind of a deal is struck between two fae that Sorka knows, because Sorka is very connected to the fae, she is shipped off to this island that is only visible once every 7 years, where a Turdadana named Aemon is said to live, and apparently he has the cure for the blood beetle plague. As you can imagine, he is kind of the beast in this Beauty and the Beast reiteration. I honestly felt like the retelling of this fairy tale, it was super spot on, sometimes a little bit too much, but I think I said in my vlog that I didn't mind that at all, because this book just had like a whole life and a whole world of its own that, like, the very obvious retelling elements from Beauty and the Beast were totally okay for me because I just loved both of our characters. We had a really nice side cast of people as well. Of course, you can imagine, like, everyone from Beauty and the Beast was in here, and I just loved the world so much, like this magical island that Sorka gets to go to. There's so many like quiet scenes. I love like this kind of theme of like slow living through fantasy books where they just take you very slowly through, like Sorka baking a loaf of bread, or going for a trip foraging for flowers in the woods, or sewing, or something like that. Like, it was just everything my little cottagecore heart wanted. This book built a cottage in my heart. So good. I just really, really liked it, and I know there's a sequel, or maybe it's a trilogy or something like that, but I'm very interested in continuing, and now I'm very interested in the rest of Emma Hamm's books. So 4 stars. Love this romance. I'm really glad that I picked this one up this month, so that is that one. Next up, I read one sci-fi this month, which was The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. This is the sequel in the trilogy of the Broken Earth trilogy. So good. 4.5 stars. Really, really, really thoroughly enjoyed this. I was a bit concerned that I wouldn't like it as much as the first one, but I think just like the topics in this book, if you're unfamiliar with this fantasy, oh no, it is fantasy, I guess. It's like fantasy sci-fi series. We are following a world where Earth can experience a season where basically everything goes berserk. There's tons of natural disasters, a lot of times in the form of like earthquakes and extremely terrifying and destructive kind of geology-based destruction, if that makes sense. I don't want to like spoil anything, so I don't think I can talk about this over much, but I just think like the elements of geology and earth sciences that N.K. Jemisin included in here, all of the different elements like that stem from that branch of science and earth sciences, I just think it's such a cool way to analyze like kind of politically and socially what is going on in this sci-fi as well, because we're following a bunch of people who are trying to survive. We have people called Origins who have the power to control the earth to an extent. We have another group of people who are known as the Guardians, who can control the Origins to some extent, and then the Origins are very much like not approved of in people who don't have power and stuff like that. And it was just like such a good commentary on everything, and then especially to analyze that through like rocks actually proved very, very cool. And I don't want to say anything, but I just think that was like a topic that I really loved reading in this book. On top of that, N.K. Jemisin is just a genius. She's just a genius, and this was incredible. So 4.5 stars. I can't wait to finish off this series. The one nonfiction I read this month was Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are by Franz Duvall. I gave this 3 stars, which is definitely a little bit disappointing because this book has been on my TBR for years, and I was very excited to pick this up, but just I think the way that this book was organized and what I wanted out of this book, I think I would recommend this book definitely to a lot of my friends and family who aren't like kind of already in the same parallel headspace and mindset as me, but like just for me personally, I didn't end up getting a lot out of this book. I didn't end up getting a lot of new information or new insights. It didn't really shift my perspective anywhere, which I think this book could definitely do for other people. But because, do you know what I mean? Like, because I was already kind of in the headspace that this book was coming from, it didn't accomplish anything for me. This book is all about animal cognition and also about how we as humans, we've just like our whole superiority complex to other species and the way that we just group between humans and non-human, or just we group all of the animals together as animal and human. It delves into kind of our testing, how we test animals, how we merit their intelligence and their levels of kind of articulation of that intelligence and all the different ways that we test them. But it just like highlighted how absurd sometimes that testing and that research can be, because most often we test them based on merits of our own intelligence, which is just so silly because we do not have the same goals. We don't have the same lives. My life, the purpose of my life is not trying to find as much food as possible to survive. And if you tested me on that, I would 100% fail, because all I know how to do is walk to the grocery store and buy expensive oat milk. Animals' lives as they are now, especially if you take squirrels or dolphins or dogs or wolves or horses or octopi, they're all living very separate lives, and to test them based on some strange merit of our intelligence to see if they can count or if they recognize themselves in a mirror. Does this matter to them? Is this beneficial to them? And so a lot of this book was shifting like our perspective and our headset into their minds and seeing from their perspective, and just seeing how ridiculous the ways that we've tried to bring out and measure this intelligence in animals really is. Also, this book does really demonstrate our really horrific and violent perception of animals as mindless machines that just wander about and have no feelings and have no thoughts, and aren't self-aware and don't plan for the future and don't recognize each other and don't remember each other, and just really throwing that out the window through literally hundreds of examples. Examples are needed, and these ones were so interesting and so fascinating, don't get me wrong, but I think just for me, I didn't want to read example after example of apes being able to do this or corvids being able to do that, especially because I was already aware of so much of that information. I wanted kind of a more deep down scientific study, whereas honestly I want to say 85% of this book was just listing examples of different things that animals can do that we've tested them on, which is valuable, but that's not what I wanted out of a book called Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? I wanted more of a commentary, I wanted more of an essay, I wanted more of definitions of cognition and animal cognition. I wanted maybe even like a history of these fields and subjects, which we do get a little bit, but definitely not what I wanted or expected out of this book, unfortunately. So I gave it 3 stars, even though I 100% do agree with everything this book said, everything this book talked about. I think it's an extremely important book, and I don't want that to seem like, well, like what I rated it is diminishing that, because it's not, but as me, the personal reader, it didn't do very much for me, so 3 stars. Finally, the last book I read we're finally here. I read The Traveling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arikawa. This was also a cool book to read in conjunction with the nonfiction, because this is all about a cat who definitely knows what he's doing, who definitely has an emotional range longer than a couple of teaspoons, who affects so much change in the lives of those he is participating in. More than that, this is about a man named Satoru, and he is going on a trip all around Japan in his van with his cat, Nana, and he's trying to get rid of his cat. He's trying to find a new home for it, but it's very clear that Satoru loves his cat so much, and so throughout the whole book, we're like, why? Why is this man getting rid of his cat, trying to pawn off his cat on his friends? This book is a tour through his past, because he goes to a number of different friends' houses that he hasn't seen in years, and this cat is like the kindling to that reconnection between them, and it's very heartwarming, very heartbreaking. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, just because I found it a little bit boring, honestly, and I didn't really like find it as humorous, I think, as I should have, or as heartwarming as I should have, but I just thought it was beautiful seeing how like this creature meant so many different things to so many different people, while also having the author supply this cat, this creature, with its own life and its own thoughts and his own feelings and everything like that. I think it was a really good blend of those two things, and also a lot seeing how like animals connect our lives, but also different ways that we use animals. Everyone in this book, from Satoru, who is like that pure animal spirit who just loves his cat and wants to cook Nana dinners every night and stuff like that, to his friends who use cats as a way to cope with like trauma with his family or something like that, and kind of use cats as an object, to his other friend who just wants to use cats for their job as hunting mice in his barn and stuff like that. It was just really interesting seeing how different people relate to animals, and in this case specifically cats. So that was really, really well done, I think, and it was heartbreaking. I did cry, so yeah, 3.5 stars. Alright, so that is finally the big tour of everything I read in May. This was an extremely long video. Thank you so much for coming along with me. I had a really, really great reading month, clearly. Definitely comment below what you read, what you got through, if you read for the Dark Academics Readathon or anything like that. I would love to hear about it. Love to know. And thank you so much for watching. This was so much fun. I had such a good month, and I'm so excited for June because I think I have some more good picks lined up. But as usual, I will see you next time with more books and things. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you so soon. Ciao!